The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Illya Friedman.
Hey, Mr. Benjamin Rock, proud owner of benrock.com.
It's pretty exciting to have benrock.com. Every time I go to benrock.com, I'm like, what fever dream am I living in?
It's such a great story, and if you didn't listen to our show last week, what's wrong with you? Go back and listen to last week and hear Ben Rock talk about getting benrock.com for the first time ever.
Yeah. Or just feel free to just hit me up on Twitter, and I'll just bore you with all the gory details of how I got benrock.com for the first time since the internet has existed. Me, Ben Rock, has benrock.com. And if you're wondering, and
so everyone who did listen to it now is going to be super bored, because now we're just rehashing it completely. And even the week before that, we kind of did the whole thing. So let's just move. No,
there's just one other thing that I want to mention about this, though, that I happen to know another guy also named Ben Rock, and I reached out to him to see if he wanted any representation on the website.
Yeah, or like an email address. Like, you could give him an email address. Yeah,
I could totally give him an email address. And he was like, no, I'm cool.
Yeah, he doesn't care. He
lives up in near Seattle, I think, and he's a dungeon master, D&D dungeon master.
And, he could get like dungeon master at benrock.com. That would be pretty slick.
He could. Yeah, I would be happy to give the other Ben Rock, and there are more Ben Rocks, but he's the other one who I've spoken to the most.
All right, so Ben, let's dive right into this week's episode, which features fantastically talented director of photography, Eric Koretz. He shot the last arc of Ozark, and we talk a lot about that. And we also talk about some of the other great projects he's worked on. And we're about to
can't wait to hear it.
Dive into that in just a minute. But let's talk about our close focus this week, which is, I think, a wonderful sort of like compare and contrast.
Compare and contrast.
Compare. Actually, I like that better than compare and contrast. Yes. So we should talk about the box office, because of course there was a new Doctor Strange Marvel movie, and continuing to go strong at the box office is another little movie called Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, of course, Marvel, it's an incredibly successful studio, and the latest Doctor Strange is no exception. But one of the metrics of tracking the success and continued success of a movie is its longevity, is its legs, and what a percent of box office drop-off that they have from one week to the next. And what do you think the drop-off was between last week of Doctor Strange and this week's box office of Doctor Strange? Any idea how much people stopped going to see that movie?
I'm going to say the drop-off was 17%.
No, it was 80%. 80%. What? Yeah, 80% fewer tickets sold for Doctor Strange this week as compared to last week. Now, there's another movie. You and I have both seen it. We've talked about it on the show. Everything Everywhere All at Once. What do you think its drop-off was this week from last week?
I'm going to say it went up. It went up 10%.
It did not go up. It went down, but it only went down 11%, which is really not very much, considering it is also on track right now to be the highest grossing movie A24 has ever released. It's going to make $50 million a year anytime now. It's 47 plus
have you
million.
Seen it yet?
Oh yeah, I loved it.
That is a movie that is impossible not to like.
That's not
so
true.
Great.
There are people, the guy next to me got up and walked out in that movie, and it is polarizing. It is not like something that most people have ever seen before. And if that's outside your comfort zone.
I'm just going to go out on a limb. I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say the guy sitting next to you, don't know who he was. Total asshole.
He probably was. He went through the movie like 2/3 of the way from the movie and like got up, shook his head, and walked out.
Man. I can count on one hand which movies I've walked out of in my life.
Yeah, well, this guy clearly wasn't into it. But I got to say, most of the people I talked to, really into it. And it's one of those movies that, like, I saw the trailer really early, and it got me excited about going to see it. But if you don't know anything about it, if you haven't seen the trailer, I'm going to encourage you not to watch the trailer. I don't think you should watch anything about this movie going in. The blanker slate you are, the better. Would you disagree? Would you think you'd want to know about this movie before you go in there?
I had seen the trailer, but the trailer kind of only posits the questions that the movie posits. It doesn't really show you anything. I mean, I think it's always better to see a movie knowing as little as humanly possible. If you think you're going to kind of like the movie, then just go. I'll never forget, it was the first time that I was like alone for a weekend when Alicia and Matt and my son were out of town. And I called Bob
Alicia
DeRosa,
being your wife.
Yes, and I called my friend and frequent collaborator Bob DeRosa, and I'm like, I can go to a movie. What should I go see? He's like, have you seen Ready or Not? I'm like, I have never even heard of Ready or Not. He's like, don't watch a trailer, just go see it. And I saw it, and it was like one of the best experiences. So to me, movies I could name that I saw without knowing anything about them would be like Pan's Labyrinth, Let the Right One In, Ready or Not. Those are all great movies to see tabula rasa, and I would very much say that Everything Everywhere All at Once. There's no way to spoil this movie, but also the less
it's pretty
you know,
hard
the
to
better.
even explain this movie, but
yeah. Now here I'm going to blow your mind. If there is an actual multiverse in our universe, is there a multiverse where Everything Everywhere All at Once is underperforming and Doctor Strange is significantly up?
Well, of course, but I think the multiverse is also the biggest cop-out, movie device of all time. That it's the ultimate Deus ex machina. But I think it's pretty funny, and I bring up this comparison too because, of course, the Doctor Strange movie is the multiverse of madness, and Everything Everywhere All at Once is also a multiverse movie. So if you were to go see both of them, you'd be really getting your fill of multiverses, and then you might as well go watch Spider-Man too because it's
also. I haven't seen the Doctor Strange movie yet, and not for lack of trying. I just haven't had a chance.
Well, there's a lot more empty seats this week.
Yeah, that's true. But I have to say that all of these movies that we're describing are wildly entertaining, and I cannot wait to see the Doctor Strange movie. And I love it, by the way, that like we're comparing like a Sam Raimi movie.
That's right.
One of my all-time favorite directors, to a cool, scrappy indie film directed by the Daniels that's honestly just all heart and so well done and so subversive and cool. And I'm glad that we have two very different poles, even though they are both multiverse movies, which is weird. But we have two very different poles that are drawing people back into the theater and kind of showing that the theater still has legs. I do wonder if the drop-off of the Doctor Strange box office maybe has more to say about us coming out of a pandemic and people still not being fully confident to go sit in a movie theater, or as many people confident to go sit in a movie theater. So all the diehards went and saw it opening weekend, and then everyone else is like, it'll be on Disney Plus, and I can...
Before you know it.
I want to see it on the big screen. I think it looks really cool. But
yeah, I actually really want to see it too. And our producer, Alana Cody, actually, she saw it this weekend, and she said it was great and actually surprisingly scary and very Sam Raimi. So there you go.
That's what I keep hearing, is that it's a fun return to form for Sam Raimi, who, in my opinion, hasn't really made a capital S Sam Raimi movie since probably before. I'm going to go with Drag Me to Hell. Drag Me to Hell, 2009.
All right. Well, supposedly the pace is frenetic as well, too. So it really moves. And I think that's kind of the way you should watch all Marvel movies, just kind of like let it wash over you. If you stop to smell the roses or think about it far too much, that's when the plot holes start appearing. So better just to buckle up and go for that ride. So anyway, so Ben, hey, let's get to the interview with Eric Koretz.
Let's do it.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
All right, so joining me now is Eric Koretz, who is the cinematographer for, our co-cinematographer for this final leg of Ozark, one of my favorite shows on television. Hey, thank you so much for joining us on the Cinematography Podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
So, Eric, you and I have known each other for a long time,
Yeah.
and I've been following your career a little bit here on social media, and every once in a while I see your name pop up in the credits, but I'm really thrilled for you. This not only is one of my favorite shows, it's a really, really big hit for Netflix, and a lot of people are paying particular attention to how they wrap this all up and if they're going to stick the landing.
Right.
Spoiler alert, I watched it, totally stick the landing. But how did you come to be a part of Ozark?
I was recommended by a camera operator, Ari Isler. We had worked a bunch together in the past. He's a friend of mine. And then I'm interviewed with Sean, who we had known of each other's work, of course. Sean Kim. Sean Kim, yeah. Incredible DP. Yeah. He has been on since episode 1 of the season. And then finally I met with Jason. And Jason, we had a 20-minute interview. And then Jason said, okay, I just really wanted to make sure you're not an asshole. So That was
Well,
it.
yeah, Jason Bateman, notorious jerk, that Jason Bateman. So, I don't know. I don't know if you ever listened to his podcast, but oh my God,
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's really fun. It's really good. I'm a huge fan. Huge fan of all of stuff, and it seems like most things in this industry, it's who you know. It's
Right.
it's you got connected to some people, and they said, "Come on in." You had some good meetings, and look at you now. Now you got to finish out the season, which is great.
And it is important, like networking and meeting people. I'm a natural recluse, but I'm also social, so I'm a weird mix of those things. So sometimes I have to force myself out, but it's important.
Us ambiverts don't get a lot of attention. It's always the extroverts and the introverts, but the ambiverts, we're overlooked.
Ambiverts, that's the word.
That's what it is. So you're coming to a series that has well-established look, and other cinematographers from the series like Ben Cutchins and Armando Salas, they've been on the show before too, and we've talked extensively about the look of the show. When you come into a show, I want to say in the waning hours, so to speak, how do you treat your responsibility for this? I know there's going to be some sort of attitude of like, well, just don't fuck it up. But at the same time, there's also like, you want to be consistent. You want to maybe make it your own a little bit. Tell me about your process of coming into this the show near the end.
Right. Well, like you kind of alluded to, you can't just come in saying I can't fuck this up, because if you're not taking chances and risks, then you're not doing a service to the show. And Armando and Ben just an incredible job with previous seasons. I love their work so much. Ozark is one of my favorite shows. I mean, I definitely knew the look. And I think with my work, one of the reasons why they brought me on is I'm sort of a chameleon in my work. If you look at my IMDb or any of my commercials, I don't really have one style. I sort of change it based off of what the story is, what's called for. You could see style in some of my work, but it's not singular. So I'm not going to lie. It's very difficult coming into a show halfway through when the look's established, the crew's already there. But the amazing thing is that, this crew is some of the best in the business. They make it really easy. Once you talk to them and see the flow of things, and then you see how Sean had been doing things previously in such an incredible way, and then you add your own flourishes to it. It felt pretty seamless to me, maybe just because this is how I always loved to light. It's about shadow, it's about character, it's about story, and the cinematography in Ozark, as you know, is a character in the story. It's telling the story in ways that a lot of other shows don't do. So it just felt right the moment I started shooting, day one.
Yeah, I remember talking to, I believe it was Ben ages ago, about like the giant negative fill fly swatter that goes over the bird's house, and it's like that's not something that you see most often. Like just massive, I don't know what it is, like 20-30 by of neg fill. But I mean, and for our listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, we're basically talking about a giant black piece of opaque fabric, which is to block out the sun completely and actually enhance the shadows, and the rigging that is required for that, and the time and to move that and to follow the sun and everything else. That's a major set piece, but it also creates that really cool look, the daytime look, which doesn't look like daytime or your typical daytime.
Yeah, and we have an incredible grip team. Landon Rudell is the key grip. And I think what's unique about Ozark is that we start with the negative. So we start by taking out the sun, because when you take out the sun, then you can shape the light to how you want it. And we had a joke that there's no sun in Ozark. It was kind of a joke. It was true, really. So we would start by 20 buys, 30 buys on what they call lulls. Take out the sun, then we bring in the light. Edison Jackson's the gaffer, incredible. And we would just, we'd shape it how we wanted to, because the light tells such a story in Ozark, the darkness and the light,
Tell me a little bit about the camaraderie when a series reaches its end, because you got to be there really. This show's not coming back, at least I highly doubt it, but they really wanted to have a finite story. The finite story was told, but at least in my experience, when I've been on shows that ended and it was a happy ending, people knew that it had run its course. Many of the people that I worked with were like friends for life, people who I felt like we'd kind of gone through a whole thing. I remember when I'd been on a show for a long time, and the parties and the socializing and everything else. What's it like ending a series in the pandemic? What's that about?
It's strange and familiar at the same time. You have to be cautious, because if you're not safe during the height of the pandemic, you can take out half the show. But most of this crew who are just so incredible, and they they had been doing this show for some of them for all 4 seasons. You know, if they didn't live in Atlanta, they'd come back, you know, every year. And they're such a tight-knit group. So it's a little bit different coming in halfway through the final season where, you haven't been there all that time, but it still felt like family. And the producers and Jason Bateman, they say it all the time, the crew is family. It's really great when you're bonding with everyone and it's symbiotic. That's the way to do it, really.
So have you watched it yet? Have you watched the show?
No, can you tell me what happens?
No, I'm not going to tell you what happens, but I'm just wondering, I know some people who they don't necessarily like to go watch the stuff that they did, and other people that's the only way that they can learn and everything else. But how was the experience of watching your work for the finale?
Honestly, it was always hard for me to watch my work after I've shot it because I just see the mistakes. That's just my personality. And so the first time I saw it, we had a ceremony like 2 weeks ago. It was the premiere of the first 2 episodes, and it was in New York, and all the cast was there. A lot of the crew was there, and we projected it, which I had never seen it, fully projected before. It's a TV show, so that was incredibly nerve-wracking. But I was watching it, and I actually could separate myself from the experience and really appreciate it, especially Blown Up, which is I loved it, and I was even happier that people would stop fucking asking me what happens at the ending now, so I can.
Yeah, that's right.
So I don't have to say that anymore. What I would tell everyone is that everyone dies. And then,
but that's not true. But inevitably, we all die. We have a finite period of time. If you go forward to the logical conclusion, everyone dies.
That was my point exactly. Existentialism.
Exactly. I'm so glad that we could bring existentialism into this conversation.
Always.
So Eric, what would you like to talk about in regards to Ozark? Is there something I didn't ask you about here that you want to get into? I'm going to turn the tables on you and let you direct this conversation a bit.
Wow, very unexpected. Well, I mean, I think one thing that's unique about Ozark is how we use depth of field, and I think it's unique in that the shallowness of focus really tells the story in a lot of ways that other shows don't do all the time like we do. So, a lot of times we're shooting wide open. Sean brought in these beautiful Noctilux 0.95 Leicas. Liam Snow is the most incredible focus puller, and he would just, push in 20 feet fast and he'd nail it, every time, and or change how the focus rolls and tell the story that way. So, I mean, that was really refreshing to be able to do that all the time and tell the story that way. I mean, Ozark really is a cinematographer's dream to shoot it because it's obviously about the characters, but you use every tool that you can possibly do to tell the story with the cinematography. And the directors are incredible as well. Amanda Marsalis, who directed the first 2 episodes, she has a totally different style than Melissa Hickey, who directed episode 10, and then Jason Bateman obviously has his own particular style. But what was unique about it was that the producers, they really allow the directors to sort of tell the story in their own way. There's no one really looking over their shoulder saying, no, don't do that, don't do this. It's great because you're shooting it like you're shooting a movie. And that was one of the things that Jason and I talked about before I came on, is that it's a movie making process as opposed to like your normal TV making process, and using all those cinematic tricks in the story.
That's for sure. There is one shot that I look forward to every time I see them on the series. And I got to say, you can pick them out, I would say, particularly actually from television of a certain era, but I don't see used very often, but became a real, I feel like, signature piece of the show, which is it's almost an establishing shot of inside the building, looking out through a window as a car pulls up. Right. That happens throughout the series over and over again.
True.
And there is like this sense of foreboding if it's, a black Lincoln SUV versus, you don't know who's getting out of these vehicles.
Right.
There's a lot of establishing shots, sometimes no other characters in the frame. It's through the hotel window. Here comes a car that's pulling up. What's going to happen next? And it's a really effective way of setting the scene. And for me, it never got old. It never got boring. It's like, this is how I know we're entering into the next bit of business.
Yeah.
Was there a name for that shot when you guys were shooting the show? Do you know exactly what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think that happens often in the show because we're not in a rush. We're not cutting to overs and back and forth and, we're really letting the scene play out. So, for example, in episode 9, when we're just, we start on, just a whiskey glass as Jason and Laura's taking out these glass bottles and pouring, and then just letting them kind of sit down and walk off frame, but you stay on the glass. There's no story obligation to just cut to the chase. We could really let it have space and play out. And I think that creates tension in some ways, and it allows the viewer to sort of soak in who these characters are. And all these actors are incredible with just their facial expressions or certain movements, and they've got it down so well, and just allowing that to play out in the frame. So we didn't name it, but there's a reason. There's a reason for it. It's creating space and breadth and all of those beautiful things.
Yeah, you have to have that. Otherwise, you lose the impact. If everything is just back to back to back to back, you got to have those moments for sure.
Yeah.
You worked with Jason Bateman directing an episode, A Hard Way to Go.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? Was it as grueling and as demanding as I imagine it was?
So grueling. No, I mean, Jason is such an incredible director. He's been in this business so long, and he knows precisely what he wants. He's really a master technician in the vein of Fincher and some of these other more technical directors. And even when he's an executive producer, so even when he wasn't directing the first 3 episodes that I did, he would come in and talk about shots and suggest shots and discuss things with the actors. It's weird to see him separate from Marty Bird and then suddenly become Jason Bateman, director, producer, and talk about shots. At first it threw me off because I was like, Marty Bird's talking to me right now. But he's incredibly precise. It was incredible working with him.
I had the good fortune to meet Jason right after the ArcLight premiere. I think it was season 2 of Ozark. And,
cool.
Hell of a nice guy, just incredibly nice guy.
Yeah.
And so down to earth and incredibly knowledgeable and great at his craft. I didn't expect to be such a fanboy, but I was totally a fanboy. It was nice to meet him, and I like some of his other work and stuff. And I'm glad that you got the experience, because I hear the same thing from everyone who works with him. I always hear that he's one of the real good ones. He's one of the real good ones in town. So
it's true. He's a craftsman too. And you can see it. You can see it in the finale for sure.
You absolutely can. It definitely comes through. So Eric, let's shift gears a little.
Yeah.
How did you get the bug for this? When did you realize that cinematography was a career that you could do and yet you were going to do?
I was kind of dragged into it. I would say when I first went to undergrad for graphic design, and I always did music videos and EPKs and shot my own stuff, but I thought of it from a filmmaking, like a directing perspective. I wrote things, and then I'd been doing that for a while and wasn't really liking it. And I actually applied to AFI on a whim. I thought to myself, okay, I'm just going to apply for cinematography just so I could learn the camera, not knowing that most of the students in the class, actually all of them, had like years of experience and were actual cinematographers when I was not. And I got in with a very weird portfolio. I always did photography, so that was part of it. And I did some weird animations that I shot and then animated over. And so I got in. And then after year 1, I was like, you know what? Actually, I think I'm going to be a cinematographer. And then from then on, it was just a full-in dive. I started doing documentaries. I had one that won South by Southwest. Then I started from that. It was a lifestyle documentary called Dragon Slayer, which was about this skateboarder named Screech. And it was all with a 5D. That was when the 5D first came out, and we were using it for video. And so it was very cinematic in a way that a lot of documentaries weren't at the time. And so that segued into that style of commercials. And I started doing a lot of commercials. But for me, ultimately, telling stories is what I love. And so I love doing commercials, but film and TV is where my heart is. So I always go back to that, and I love it. Yeah.
Well, AFI, it's a conservatory. It's a really different experience, I think, than a lot of film schools, and you're very fortunate to, I think, have gotten your master's degree in filmmaking and cinematography there. They really have an interesting approach.
Yeah, I mean, it made me a cinematographer. I was not before AFI, and it's unique in that you just you don't have free time or life your first year at AFI, because you're 7 days a week shooting and in class and crewing on other people's projects. And lately, the past few years, once a year, I've been going back and teaching a lighting seminar once a year, which I love, because the theme of my class is what not to do. And instead of telling them all the great stuff I've done, I tell them all the times I've fucked up and how the bad experiences I've had and how to learn from that and make it a positive. And also, I talk a lot about getting your mind and body right, because this is such a fucking hard business, and you really need to get all of that right, whether it's through meditation or through eating correctly or just however you do it, working out, yoga, just so that you can be in this for the long haul, because this business fucks you up.
I think that the number one thing is sleep deprivation. I think sleep deprivation is like, if you don't do well with sleep deprivation, then or find ways to pay that sleep debt back. Like when you're not working, it's like, I'm going to go for 12 hours tonight. Going to try and really like make it up, because it'll take it out of you. It'll take you out of you in a real way that is, I know it's not healthy, and we've all kind of signed off in one capacity or another to it, but I think that getting yourself straight on all those things is, I think your class sounds amazing. I wish that class existed when I was in film school. It sure didn't, because that's not the stuff that people tell you. They tell you, they either give you pie in the sky, like, oh, everything's going to be great, or, oh, it's so hard and you're going to have to claw your way into everything. They don't actually give you that, like, hey, you better be prepared. You better be prepared, and here's how it can go horribly wrong. Right. And I think that it's really awesome that you're giving back to, I would say kids at AFI, but they're not kids. They're not kids. They're students. They're all professionals who are coming in there to sharpen their tools, so to speak, in a way. So that's really awesome. I think that's great. All right, so AFI, you're in AFI, you've completely changed your life around. When you get out of AFI, are you just immediately shooting like, these giant commercials and stuff that you're working on? Or tell me a little bit like hey, I've graduated, what comes next?
I mean, my career has had so many twists and turns, but I had a friend that was directing a documentary on Wikipedia. So basically, I shot his documentary. We went around the world. We interviewed lots of Wikipedians, Jimmy Wales from Wikipedia, celebrities. And it was my first sort of experience of like, picking up and going and having a career, because you talk about it at AFI, but you don't, you're not doing anything until you get out, really. You just don't have the time. So that was it. And then also at the time I was very into equipment, as you know. So, I had a blog, and I couldn't afford equipment. So the way to do it, I thought, was, okay, I'm just going to write about equipment, and then I'm going to ask manufacturers to send them to me. That way I can get equipment that I would now not be able to get. And it actually really worked. So, I ended up getting gear, and I would use it and write about it, and either send it back or keep it. And then that just led to better projects, because I don't want to say the equipment is the reason, but, I had the proper gear to shoot things sometimes, and then just keep going. So, and then
it's certainly helpful if you have some gear, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have access, if you want to shoot and you don't have anything to shoot with, if you can get
gear.
It's pretty tough to golf without a set of clubs. I'm just saying. It's like, or no ball. It's like, there's a couple things that
can't golf without a ball.
It's really tough. It's just visualization at that point, and every shot's a hole in one. I don't know. So yes, but
maybe it's better to golf without a ball then. I don't know.
It's all in your brain at that point. And unfortunately or fortunately, cinematography is fairly collaborative. And if you want other people to enjoy it too, there's just, the painter can't paint without the brush.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So you start this blog, and I think that's actually around the time that you and I actually met each other. Was when you were doing that, and it was really nice, actually, if I recall correctly, because I think we met and we had lunch and stuff. I would get hit up all the time by people who I would say were not qualified to review gear, or not qualified just because there are people on the internet and so like, oh, I want free gear, I'm going to reach out to someone. But when you and I met, it was like, holy shit, this guy's the real deal. This guy knows all this stuff. He's worked in the place, and we could have a real conversation. And immediately you jumped out and stood out to me of like, oh, I should pay attention to this guy. This guy is ambitious, and he's going to be going places. He's got his act together. So you're doing the blog thing for a while, but then you start picking up commercials, right? Was commercials the first place that you really got some traction?
Yeah, I mean, commercials is what really took off for me, and I was shooting a lot of commercials, and I was gone 8-9 months of the year just doing that. And I loved it. And I was traveling all over the world, but I knew I wanted to be doing a movie and telling stories. And so the first film that I did, it was called Comet, and Sam Esmail directed it. He's Mr. Robot.
Of course, yes. He's the great Sam Esmail. That's incredible. So.
And it was great. It was very stylized. Everything you see in Mr. Robot, it was in that vein. But that was it for me. I realized, okay, I need to do both. I can't just do commercials.
You know, I meet so many people who are commercial DPs, and the narrative DPs are so jealous of them. They're so jealous that, like, you know, there is a little bit of grass is always greener, because with commercials, you sometimes get a very nice schedule. You get a very nice check. You get to move in, move out of jobs pretty quickly. You can do a lot of them. But then, of course, on the commercial side, so many commercial DPs I meet go like, I really want to do narrative. Narrative is where it's at. I want to really, like, you know, but I will tell you that the people I know who work a lot in commercials, they do their first sort of like lower budget narrative project, and then it really kicks their butt and they go like, I'm going to go back to commercials.
Yeah. They're like, why the fuck would I do this?
Well, I'm just torturing myself. It's, you know, craft surface, it should not be an ice chest on an apple box. You know, it shouldn't be this like thing. It should, you know, you should have the creature comforts. So
the grass is always greener on someone else's lawn until you get onto that lawn and then you see back at yourself.
Well, I get the feeling though on this Sam Esmail project, it probably didn't feel that way to you. You actually probably were like, wow, okay, I'm really into this, just as you said, and like you wanted to do more. You got the bug. So So tell me about walking between those two worlds, walking between the commercial world and the narrative world, because I think that some people believe that it's all the same, but no, it's pretty separate, pretty different, pretty different agents,
very different worlds for the most part. I you know, it sort of depends on the project, but the commercial world, they used to not really cross-pollinate at all. I think it's more so now, because there's so many incredible commercial DPs that I see that have sort of come up with that are doing incredible TV and movies now. I think there's a lot more crossover. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly the grass is always greener when you're doing a commercial, because when I'm doing commercials for 4 months, I keep thinking, wow, I want to do a movie. And then I get to the movie and I'm like, why the fuck did I do that? But you know, I love them both. I think it's important to have balance, because when you're doing commercial, you're working with new tools a lot of times and a lot more equipment, and you're telling stories in a quicker way. And I've learned a ton from doing commercials that I take over into my narrative work, and vice versa. I take it back. And now a lot of commercials that I get are because of my narrative experience. And it was great. It's great doing that because, well, one, you have the resources when it's a commercial more than anything, but also you're shooting it in a narrative way, which is great. It's not just about the product or.
I agree. And I think that for some people, maybe they have a hard time finding the art in commerce with commercials. But I will tell you that there's so much art. There's so much stuff you have to do, and testing and pre-production and all the other stuff that really, I think, gets overlooked. People don't think about it because it's a commercial, because ultimately the goal at the end of the day is to separate someone from their money. Someone is supposed to buy a product or, employ a service or whatever it is. But to get to that point, the number of people who are involved, it's like a feature, it's like a series. There's so many people to actually get to that point. So, okay, you're doing a long form commercial, let's say, something that might run several weeks or a month. How much prep time typically are you getting on a project like that?
It's usually not too long. On commercials, you have much less prep than you do on a feature. But the incredible thing about commercials now is it's not like commercials of the way past, where you're overlighting things and it's just focusing on a product, and it's not cinematic. There's so many, you could be very cinematic with commercials now. You can shoot widescreen. You don't have to blast the key light into the talent. You can be understated, and you can have the characters in shadows. I think that's what is making commercials even more fun to shoot now, is using all the narrative tools to make it interesting and tell the story.
So Eric, tell me about Frank and Lola. I know it went to Sundance. I know it was a bit of a hit. So tell me about that project.
Yeah, Frank and Lola was an incredible experience. That was my second film, actually. It was directed by Matthew Ross, and it was his first film. It took him 10 years to get the film made. He tried over and over again. He had so many times where it was about to get made, but it wasn't the right time. And finally, he got funding, and it went to Las Vegas. It was originally set in New York, but it changed to Las Vegas when the funding came from Las Vegas. And it was a small movie. It was less than $2 million. So there was challenges with that, but we had incredible locations.
not a small cast. I mean, Michael Shannon, Justin Long, Rosanna Arquette. I mean, it's like Imogen Poots. It's like, you know, there's a lot of, you know, great people in that. So that's not bad for your second feature, man. That's really great. Yeah.
And Michael Shannon is just such a fantastic actor. He's so precise. He's so incredible with his emotions and how he uses that to tell a story. It was great working with an Imogen, and you know, Justin was my second time working with Justin, and he's hilarious. So that was incredible. And then I brought my crew I'd been working with in commercials, Don Reynolds, one of my longtime key grips, and John Buckley, my gaffer, who since passed away actually during COVID.
Oh no!
And John was a legend. He gaffed Titanic, he gaffed Avatar, and why he gaffed my little $1 million film, it was a blessing. But I think it's one of the things that I talked to AFI students about is when I was first coming out and I didn't know crew, I was like, I had a gaffer that I normally worked with that I come up with that wasn't available. And I said, I'm just going to ask some of the best to work with me. What would I have to lose? And so like multiple phone calls later, John was one of those. So I reached out to him, I showed him some of my stuff, and he said yes. And that was sort of the start of our relationship. We worked a few movies together, and that was a lot of commercials, and he became a huge mentor to me. So it was very sad when he passed away, but you can see his touches in Frank and Lolo's. It was actually before LEDs were very prevalent. So, were a lot of Kinoflows with magic cloth on it, very soft lights, and then just really utilizing master anamorphics, which had just come out for the space. And, it was a family experience. We shot 14 days in Las Vegas and then maybe another 5 in Paris. And I love that movie. I wish when it came out, it didn't get the distribution that we had hoped it would, but ultimately it got seen. It's on Netflix now, and people see it. And Sundance, that was my first experience at Sundance from that film, which is
you never forget your first Sundance experience.
No, definitely not.
Especially the waiting outside in the cold. That's an experience that you never quite. I think I can still feel some of those lines all these years later. So.
Exactly.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well.
But virtual this year, I guess.
We did virtual this year. It was actually kind of not a bad way to experience a film festival. I'm not going to lie, it's pretty good. So, well, Eric, hey, I know we're quickly running out of time here, and I want to make sure that we get you out at a reasonable time. Tell me, where can people find you online? Do you have a website or someplace where if they want to see your work?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Instagram is best. It's Eric Koretz _DP, I believe. Yeah, my website's erickoretz.com, KORETZ. And those are the best places for it, really. Or you could go on Netflix and watch my films.
That's right. That's a good place too. So
and TV,
and TV, all these places. Yeah, Ozark. Don't forget Ozark. Now you can watch the finale. So you should all go out and do that. Hey, it was a real delight having you on the show. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see what you do next. And you'll have to come back.
Thanks, Elliot. I'd love to.
All right, so that was Eric Koretz. Hey, thanks so much for being on the show. Like I said at the end of that interview, I can't wait to see what you do next. I watched Frank and Lola the other night, and it's on Netflix, and they called it a psychosexual thriller, and I agree. And boy, it's fun. It's a good movie.
Is it both psycho and sexual?
It is. It's actually both of those things, and it also takes place in Vegas and Paris, and it's all over the place in a good way.
Excellent. I'll check it out.
Okay, so Ben, it's that time again.
Time to pay them bills?
Let's pay them. All right, so we got to thank our good friends over at DZO Film, makers of fine entry-level cinema lenses. They make some incredibly affordable full-frame PL mount, EF mount cinema lenses, and they start as wide as 16, which is really, really impressive. It's the 16 is the only lens in the set that's a 2.8. The entire rest of the line is T2.1, but they're tiny. They're like smaller than a 12-ounce can of soda. They are beautifully put together, and you get way, way more value for your money than you would expect with such a low price. They're just over $1,000 for each one of these things, and really they tick all the boxes. If you are just getting into cinematography and you would like to have an entry-level professional set of PL mount or EF mount lenses with gears and everything else. They're all metal construction, and they're really actually very, very good optically. And an 80 millimeter front. Here I've just rattled off all these specs and stuff, but compared to what people, and I don't want to throw any other brands under the bus, but some of those plastic fake cinema lens companies that have been around for a while, this just blows them away. It blows them completely away, and they're absolutely worth looking at. And the Vespid primes are available all over the place, but of course over at Hot Rod Cameras, and we just got a new shipment of them because they've been really flying off the shelves lately, which I understand completely because they're a great price. They're very small, super compact, and the only comment I had an ASC DP in recently who was like, do you think you could remove the name DZO film off of here just so I don't have people Googling to see how little I paid on these lenses? And I said, we could probably come up with something, but even if you take the name off, doesn't stop it being the exact same wonderful lens.
Put a little piece of tape on it, dude. Just
a little piece of tape.
Little piece of camera tape. Who cares?
Yeah, the things are always getting Greeked out on set anyway. I just watched a movie and GMC trucks became like OMG trucks or something like that.
OMG trucks.
It was pretty good. Yeah. So and for those of you out there who are not familiar with the term Greek, it basically means disguising the brand name of a product so that as the filmmaker, as the media company, you don't appear to be endorsing any brand or another. And clearly this GMC SUV that was featured in this movie, they didn't pay for promotional consideration, so it became an OMG truck, which I thought was pretty good.
I also just want to say it's not just about making it look like you're endorsing them. You might not have the rights to use it, so
that's true too. Usually, if you were going to make a brand, show them in not the best light, then they might sue you. And I know that happened with Cliffhanger and a particular brand of climbing equipment. There's a harness that fails at the beginning of Cliffhanger. And I remember that the company that made that harness, even though the name was never seen, they said it was so distinctive, they sued the filmmakers because they said, our harnesses don't break like that. And you showed it breaking. And now it's going to negatively impact everyone's feeling about our product. So you got to be careful with what you do with those things when you're making a movie with Sylvester Stallone and millions of dollars.
And even dumbass me, doing a horror movie, I remember we were trying to get product placement for a movie that I did that takes place in a grocery store. So you're going to be seeing products on shelves left and right. And so we were trying to get product placement, but when you're making a horror movie, nobody wants to see their product bludgeoning someone to death.
Yes, for sure. I get it.
Even A1 death bludgeons. They don't want your product placement.
So did you guys have some fun with your renaming of some of those brands instead of like A1 steak sauce? Was it like B2 or something?
Well, not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but the legality of it is you could go into a grocery store and film down an aisle, and as long as you're not pulling a close up of A1 steak sauce, you're okay. Even if it is identifiable as A1 steak sauce in your shot.
Yeah, as long as you didn't go and single it out like that.
But for stuff that was singled out, we either had to get clearance. In some cases, we did get product placement, like an energy drink gave us product that we got to use. And it's like anything like that we got was great.
Was it Brondo?
It was not. I will not say. You'll have to go watch Alien Raiders and then you'll see it. And and ironically, there is an ice cream company called UFO where they make
UFO ice cream sandwiches.
Yeah. They actually gave us some signage and stuff that we were able to use. I don't know that it was product placement. I don't know that they paid us for it, but they allowed us to use it. And since there were aliens in the grocery store, they
felt good about it.
It was a very unsubtle nod to the actual plot of the movie with no subtext.
And now, short ends.
So anyway, Illya, it is that time for us to go into our short ends. What is your pet obsession of the week?
Wow. Okay. So I just got back early this morning from a very early flight out of Portland, where I was at the Portland Lens Summit. My obsession this week is the Portland Lens Summit. And you're probably going, Portland Lens Summit? What the hell is that? Well,
do they have jugglers?
Actually, they have a unicyclist who shows up. In fact,
I assume
the Unipiper
shows up. That guy's there at anything that happens in Portland. There's a unicyclist who juggles, right?
He doesn't juggle. He plays the bagpipes, and they're not just any bagpipes. They're flaming bagpipes, and he plays them while wearing a Darth Vader mask, which is and he's called the Unipiper. And he plays like this,
sending a lot of mixed messages at me. He's unicycling while wearing a Darth Vader mask and playing a bagpipe that's on fire. I mean, pick a thing. Pick a lane, guy.
Flaming bagpipes, yes.
Pick a fucking lane.
You can find, you know what, I'll ask Alana Cody to please put a link to the Unipiper on YouTube. So anyone who is hearing the sound of my voice who would like to see what the hell I'm talking about, there's a pretty good YouTube video of him like riding in front of the Keep Portland Weird sign, playing, I think, like, you know, the Stormtrooper March or the Darth Vader March or whatever it is from Star Wars on the bagpipes.
At least something is on brand. At least he's got some kind. It's like he's only doing covers of Coldplay. You're like, what? Okay, I don't get it.
And he does wear a kilt because, you know, the bagpipes.
Well, again, that's on brand for the bagpipes. At least there's some consistency.
Anyway, so yes, despite the Unipiper being there, that's not what the whole event is about. The event is ostensibly about lenses, and actually it's sort of a gathering of lens techs, and at least for the cinema industry, lens techs are a pretty rare and special breed. There's not that many of them out there, and a big chunk of them all come together and kind of geek out. It's like, you know, for the hardcore lens people, it's a lot of fun. A few other sort of lens-related companies show up. A company called Crowzeal that makes the world's greatest lens projector, which I've got on order, and they're very, very late in delivering. So if they listen to this, I hope you get me my projector really soon. But they set up a projector in this room. Actually, it takes place at Kerner Camera, which is the sort of professional rental house in Portland. They are like, you know, the number one, all the biggest shows, all the stuff goes through Kerner, and they do this really great event. And every year it grows. And I got to say that even though there was a pandemic and they didn't have the event in person for the last couple of years, I don't think they missed a step. I'd say that it seemed like there was just as many people this year as there was in 2019, and every other trade event I've been to so far, like this year, so like NAB was half as many. So it's like Kerner continues to surprise and impress, and it's a really, you know, it's kind of incredible show. They did a very, very impressive, and I know you're not a huge drinker, Ben, but they had, if you can imagine, 12 taps and a trailer of beer and cider and thing, and it's like they do a lot for the community there. They really try to make people feel welcoming. They also had a taco truck. And they were very, very on the ball about being vaccinated. Like, you know, you showed up, you weren't getting in unless you showed your vaccination card. You had to prove it. And there was someone who didn't have it, and they said, well, I'm sorry, we can't let you in. The person turned around and walked right away. So it was like, yeah, they were serious. If you were coming to that event, they were going to make sure that you at least had that piece of paper that said you were vaccinated. So, and I got to say that it's a pretty darn good gathering of about 99% of the lens companies out there. And so all the big players are there, like, you know, your Cooks and your Lights, which is, of course, formerly called Leica. And then, you know, other brands, too, like PS Technic was showing off their new anamorphic lenses, which are super cool and available in the U.S. from Hot Rod Cameras, as well as Caldwell. Caldwell, I don't think they do any other show, really, except for this one. And the Caldwell anamorphic lenses are spectacular, and those were shown off. And, yeah, it was, and, you know, a company called Laowa was there, and Laowa, you know, does fun little lenses, macro lenses, probe lenses, all kinds of stuff like that. It is a ridiculously good event. If you wanted to go to one, and there were people from all over the country and all over the world. There are people who flew in from the East Coast, people who flew in from other countries, because if you actually are like, you know, you're thinking about making an investment, which might be, I guess on the low end, $5,000 or $6,000, but probably more likely like 50, 60 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. If we're talking about like the new Ingenue or the new Cook or the new Leica lenses, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars for these comprehensive sets of 10 lenses and stuff like that. You might want to actually look at them in person before you plunk down some money. It you know, it makes sense to me. I mean, I would, you know, I'd want to drive a car before I bought it. Maybe it makes sense to take a trip and play with some lenses before you bought one sight unseen. And yeah, it was really great. I met some people in from Canada, some people in from Brazil. It was you know, look here, it's a total geek fest, but at the same time, if you're in this industry and if you think the lenses in some way impact your creative choices or what you're doing, and you want to talk to all the people who work for these manufacturers, like, you know, Canon's there, Fuji is there. You get to talk to all these reps in person. You get to actually put hands on. You get to swap them on cameras. You can record something. You can make up your own test right there on the spot and put them in another room and project them. It's like there's nowhere else you can really do that. You can't do that at NAB. Can't do it at Cinegear. And if you want to try to do that individually, like through rental houses and stuff like that, you can do it, but good luck. It's a big pain in the butt. And that's one of the things I thought that, you know, we really pride ourselves at Hot Rod Cameras to be able to give somewhat of this experience, but to be able to do all of that in one place in 2 days, There's nowhere else you can do that. And that's what makes Kerner Camera, Portland Lens Summit, something completely special and unique, and why it's got so many fans from all over the world.
I mean, is the place just like soaking with the top DPs in the world?
There are some very talented people who show up for that. And there are some very talented DPs locally in Portland. But no, it's not just DPs. I would say rental house owners, people who spend perhaps millions of dollars on lenses. They show up to this. Individual owner operators, I would say that it's a nice mix of people. But no, if you're one of the really top DPs, typically the way it works is you call up one of these companies and they arrange for a private test of some of the stuff. But I would argue that that's actually worse. I'd say that's worse than coming to the Lens Summit and actually getting a good overview of everything. And you could shoot a test there, but really the way that most big time DPs want to do it is they want all their creature comforts and they want to do the absolute, they want a private test. They don't want to have it, a whole bunch of people around. And there are a whole bunch of people around there. So it may not be necessarily the best place for a elaborate test, probably a terrible place for an elaborate test. But if you want to get a quick sort of introduction and kind of understand a little bit of something, this place is really perfect for that.
Very cool. Sounds cool. I mean, sounds like something I would actually kind of enjoy, although I wonder if my eyes would glaze over after a few hours.
I actually met several directors that were there, and I think that there's a lot of directors who want to have a intelligent conversation with their camera team about lenses. And I think that there's a lot of directors who feel like, they aren't entirely qualified for that. And I think that this is a good place because you can ask the questions, not in front of your DP, and be like, hey, I don't understand this exactly. Can you show me what this is all about? And the people there are generally really happy to oblige and get into all that, which is great. All right. So, Ben, what is your short end this week?
Well, it's something I'm a little bit late to the party on, but I think YouTube is, the algorithm has finally figured out how to serve up exactly the kind of thing that I'm just going to watch over and over again. And one of the things it served up was something that I was aware of but hadn't really watched a lot of, which is a YouTube channel called the SloMo Guys. Have you ever seen them?
I have seen those. As a matter of fact, the SloMo Guys was your particular catnip. You were into it?
I've been checking it out. Yeah. So, and it reminded me actually of you because you and I were at NAB the first time either one of us saw a Phantom camera, which is at the time was a military camera that they were using to say like, hey, if we shoot a missile through this building, we need to shoot super high speed footage of it. And they were tired of shooting films. So they put a bunch of military money into developing a camera that could go higher frame rates. And then we were at NAB, I think the first year that Phantom was there to promote it as like, hey, maybe filmmakers would want to go higher speed than I think the highest digital cameras could go at the time was 60 frames per second. And it was all based on you're basically doubling 30 frames per second, which was the highest basic speed that it would run at. And I kept being told by manufacturers, yeah, you're never going to get any faster than that with digital. And then you and I turn the corner and we're looking at this Phantom camera and it's
1,000 frames a second. Yeah, exactly.
Holy crap. Yeah. And I was watching one of the videos that they have, and we can link it in show notes maybe, was them. It's the two guys. It's Gavin and Dan, and they were shooting bullets through eggs.
Oh, yeah. That's famous.
It's so good. And they crank it ultimately up to 1 million frames per second. You can see what's going on, 1 million frames per second. They're using, I don't know how off the shelf, but they're using regular old Phantom cameras.
Yeah, they're not so off the shelf. Those cameras that go those sort of high speeds, what actually happens is you window the sensor smaller and smaller and smaller, and the 1 million frame per second one is like a military one. It's very, very expensive, and generally, usually they're in black and white, but I know they make a color one, and I'm sure they got a hold of that, and that's a
on the shooting a bullet through the egg, it was windowed way in when they got to 1 million frames per second, and it was crazy low resolution. But there was just something insane about watching stuff at 1 million frames per second. But what I like about it is they kind of talk you through the process of figuring out how to do whatever they're doing in slow motion, how they're going to quantify it. There was one where they were breaking large sheets of glass in slow motion and showing you how the fractures ripple across it. It's just a fascinating channel, and they keep saying everything looks better in slow motion, and it's true. Everything does look just infinitely more interesting in slow motion just because it's so ordinary, like an egg, and yet so exotic to see an egg slow down like that. And there was one that they did where they covered a trampoline with mouse traps, and the Dan guy jumped off of a ladder into the mouse traps. Something I would not do, by the way. I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to hurt a lot. I might have to go to the hospital. He was fine. But it's interesting because a lot of times they're kind of showing the pattern, the phenomenology of like, here's what happens when we do this, and when you slow it down to 30 frames per second or something, you can really see patterns in it that you wouldn't see in other places. And I feel like there was a VFX guy who I worked with who's also a director named Matt Santoro, and he's a really just an unbelievably accomplished guy. And I remember he would always find stuff like that as reference for visual effects, for stuff that's like extreme macro or extreme slow motion or whatever. Like, it's worth seeing as a filmmaker. It's worth understanding how the tech works, and also like how emotionally it works when you watch it. Like, how does it make you feel? It's just interesting, and it's fun to watch all the weird experiments that these two dudes come up with.
I don't want to blow your mind here or anything, but you remember I used to work for this company, Dalsa. Well,
never heard of them.
Yeah, they had a sensor, if I recall correctly, that they used to photograph light. Like, and you know how fast light goes. It was something like 1 trillion frames per second. Just to,
if I'm not mistaken, light moves at the speed of light.
Yes, exactly. But you can get glimpses of photons when you go that fast. And actually, I want to say it was like 300 trillion or something like that. It is such a ridiculous speed. I have no idea how they do it. I think they can only take it for a very short period of time, and you can only use it for like, very, very specific things. And the resolution, I think, is very, very low. But they had something that was like this insane, like 300 trillion frame per second camera, which was not practical for anything that you would want to use it for. But if you wanted to capture like particles flying, really fast, that was a thing. So
scientific cameras are where it's at, man. Well, and also, like, I remember in the 90s, a friend of mine who's a special effects guy was describing, he was working on a car commercial where they were filming an airbag deploying at an extremely high speed, and they had the highest speed 35 millimeter camera. I have no idea what it was. And he was telling me what a nightmare it was to shoot with, because, it's like, when you think about it, that terrible. Film is flying through there. It can shred the sprockets. It can
photosonics.
If it jams, it can damage the camera, because where the movement and everything would just fill with film instantly, and they would have to be picking it out.
That's right.
And obviously, it also needed like way more light. And I know the Phantom needs light. Anything super high speed is going to need light, but being able to use modern sensors and be able to, go above, probably 400 ASA is going to make a big difference for high speed. And also, you don't need an entire team of people to do it. When you watch this, you realize, like, one schmo and a camera, and as long as you know how to set your lens and set your f-stop and all that stuff, you're going to be good to go. And I just love how it's democratized, that kind of thing.
A lot of people don't think about it, but in the era of film, you had to stop the film in order for a picture to be exposed. And so think about how fast it had to go, what a brief period of time it had to come to a complete stop, and then have the image exposed there, and then advance to the next one. So there was all this stuff happening, all in such tiny fractions of a moment. There was one film camera manufacturer, they said, forget a shutter, forget stopping the film anymore. We're going to use a rotating prism that is synchronized with the film. So as the film is flying through the gate, it's not really a gate. We now have a prism that is starting to paint the light across the moving film, so it never has to stop, and it starts high and it ends low. It was a bit of engineering marvel, but it was actually because it had to go through that extra piece of glass and was moving like that. It wasn't particularly sharp, and it wasn't particularly the best system out there. And
what was the name of that camera? I've never heard of that.
Oh yeah, it's inside the American Cinematographer's Manual, going back probably to the 6th version or something like that. I've got it somewhere. I could look it up, but there's a whole bunch of high-speed cameras. Hey, this is the weird thing about LA. LA, you throw a rock, you hit someone who works in the industry. And my next door neighbor, when I moved into Van Nuys, was a high-speed film cameraman. That's all he did was high speed, and he worked with Photosonics and all these other systems. And, the stories, smoke would come out of them. The things would sometimes rattle and fall apart. I mean, they had to spin up to this really, really high rate of speed, and you only had a certain amount of film that could go in there and blow through it really fast. And yeah, if the film, tore or jammed or anything, that was a really expensive mistake, and cleaning up your camera could take, the rest of the day. It could be I
love hearing the stories of the ingenuity to do stuff like that. Like, I remember talking to Jacques Heitkin, who shot the original Nightmare on Elm Street, who we've threatened to get on the show at some point. And, Nightmare on Elm Street, landmark horror movie, arguably Wes Craven's best film, or certainly one of my favorites of all time. And there's a famous shot in that where it's the girls in slow motion skipping over the rope, and it's all dreamy and bloomy and saturated and crazy looking, and the camera dollies over and slowly moves into real speed. And at the time, in the early 80s, they didn't have cameras that had a speed change on them like they did even in the mid 90s, and it resolves to real speed with sync sound. And while that's happening, the dreamy filter goes away. The way Jacques did it was they had like a Variac plugged into that camera, and one guy was just riding the Variac and changing the speed of the camera motor. One guy was pulling the iris, one person was pulling focus, and then for the dreamy thing, they had a super long filter made that was just clear glass on one end and like double whatever Pro Mist on the other end, so it was all bloomy and pretty. And so you have one camera assistant just slowly pulling that through the whole shot. And it's, I believe, on a dolly, so you have a dolly, focus pull, an iris pull, a Variac pull, and a filter pull. And I dare say there's 1,000 ways you could pull that shot off today that would not be nearly as hard or impressive as that.
Well, just to answer your question, I did a quick Google search, and actually that camera I was talking about with the rotating prism was called a Fastax, and the Fastax was actually originally developed by Bell Labs, and they made an 8mm, a 16mm, and a 35mm version, and they went really fast. The 8mm version actually had the fastest speed. It would go up to 18,000 frames per second.
What?
Yeah.
How do you get 18,000 frames of Super 8 or 8mm?
You have a custom, probably 400-foot spool made of 8mm film. I'm guessing that's what they do.
Wow.
And then, it looks like you could do like 5,000 in 35 and 10,000 in 16. So, yeah.
Nuts. Well, I'm only interested in the 8mm version of it, but that still sounds awesome.
Anyway, so Ben, I think that just about does it for this week. Where can people find you?
Where indeed?
It's a mystery. Where can people track you down? They want to reach you.
I won't go into any more story about it ever again. I promise to not talk about it, but benrock.com. Go to benrock.com. You can find all my socials on there. You can friend me on LinkedIn or whatever. Follow me on Twitter. Say hi. Say that you're a fan of the show, or a fan. That's self-serving, but say you listen to the show.
Well, you can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, and you know what? If you are a fan of the show and you do come in, there's a Hot Rod T-shirt in it for you. Just come on in, say, hey, I listened to the podcast. Can I get that shirt? Someone will hook you up with a shirt. We've been doing it. We still got some shirts left, so why not? I
wore my shirt to the beach a couple weeks ago.
You went to the beach?
I did. It's because I have a child.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know what else could get you there. So, yeah. I was gonna say you spend a lot of time laying out, getting tan, sun tanning. No,
just chasing a kid along the beach, hoping that nobody drowns.
Okay. Yeah. So Ben, let's thank some people. Who should we thank?
Well, first and foremost, as always, Alana Cody, who arranges all these amazing interviews and gets us to talk to some of our heroes.
Yeah, and we got a couple of ones we've been sitting on for months.
Oh, no.
Years even, that are about that. Well, the movies that are related to them are about to come out. So they're finally going to come out. So the next couple of weeks, we got some stuff that are older interviews, but we held them because now people will be able to see what it is we're talking about.
Man, if we ever talk to the DP of The Day the Clown Cried, we'd be screwed because they're never going to release that movie. I think that Jerry Lewis said it could be released like after he was dead for 20 years or something. So we have to wait until, oh God, I don't even want to think about it.
Well, we don't have that problem. We didn't interview that guy, so
it's not too late.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that.
I'll get my Ouija board.
Let's also thank Kays Alatrachi. Kays, thank you for the music, the wonderful music that you have graciously donated to the show. And when I see you on Thursday this week, which is going to be after this episode drops, I'm going to talk to you about music. I'm going to talk to you about more music possibly for maybe like next season of the Cinematography podcast.
Well, and for anyone who likes our music, please go to musicbykays.com and check out some of his work, and consider hiring him for composing a score, or doing CGI on your next film, or color grading, or directing,
or just music. Music. He could probably do it in his sleep. So
at this point,
yeah. And let's thank Ben Katz. Ben Katz, we probably said a few times in this episode. Maybe had a couple of false starts. Thanks for making us sound sane. I appreciate that.
Less doltish.
Yeah, that's good. All right, Ben, what's left? We thank some people. We want to tell people to go check out our website, camnoir.com. You can go see all the archive of all the shows, read the show notes, click on links, find more information. Anything else? Anything else you got?
I think we're covered, man. I don't know what else there is.
No
one's listening.
There's nothing left. Yeah, everyone is clearly turned off their podcast by now. Okay. Hey, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode.
All right.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.